The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, and Maya Rodriguez was running out of places to go. Her old Honda Civic sat in the corner of a 24-hour gas station parking lot, windows fogged up from her breath. She'd been living in that car for almost 4 months now, ever since the eviction notice came through her apartment door. Maya wasn't always homeless. Just 2 years ago, she was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, leading a team of 12 soldiers through the dangerous streets of Iraq. She had a purpose then, a mission, and people who counted on her. Now at 36 years old, she found herself counting quarters for a cup of coffee and wondering where she could park for the night without getting hassled by security guards. The injury that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in Baghdad. An improvised explosive device went off just 50 feet from her convoy. The blast threw her against the side of an armored vehicle, crushing 2 vertebrae in her lower back and leaving her with hearing damage in her left ear. The doctors said she was lucky to walk away. Maya didn't feel very lucky. After her medical discharge, the Veterans Affairs Office promised help. There were forms to fill out, appointments to attend, and a long waiting list for everything. The disability payments took 8 months to start coming through. By then, Maya had already burned through her savings trying to pay rent and medical bills that kept piling up. She tried to work, really tried, but standing for long periods sent shooting pain up her spine, and the constant ringing in her ear made it hard to concentrate. Employers would see her military background and get excited during interviews, but when she had to explain the limitations caused by her injuries, their enthusiasm would fade. The rejections started piling up just like the medical bills. The night everything fell apart was ordinary in the worst way. Maya came home from another failed job interview to find a bright orange notice taped to her apartment door. 3 months behind on rent, 30 days to pay or get out. She sat on her couch that night staring at the notice, calculating and recalculating numbers that just wouldn't add up. She sold everything she could, the television, her grandmother's jewelry, even her military dress uniform. It hurt to see those blue ribbons and medals go to a stranger at the pawn shop, but Maya needed every dollar. Still, it wasn't enough. On the last day of March, she packed what could fit in her car and drove away from the only stable home she'd known since leaving the military. Living in a car is harder than people think. It's not just about having a place to sleep, though that's challenging enough. It's about having nowhere to shower, nowhere to do laundry, nowhere to cook a proper meal. It's about constantly moving because you can't stay in one spot too long without someone calling the police. It's about the shame that creeps in when you see people you used to know, and you have to pretend everything is fine. Maya developed a routine. She'd wake up before dawn and drive to the truck stop on the highway, where she could use the restroom and wash her face for $2. Then she'd go to the public library when it opened at 9. The library became her office, her living room, and sometimes her bedroom when she could find a quiet corner where the security guards wouldn't notice her dozing off. She applied for jobs online using the library's computers. She researched veteran services and housing programs, filling out application after application. The waiting lists were months long. Emergency housing was limited to people with children or those facing immediate medical crises. Maya fell into a gap somewhere in between, too functional for crisis intervention, but too damaged to function normally. The winter was brutal. December brought temperatures that made sleeping in the car dangerous. Maya would run the engine for heat, but gas was expensive, and she was always worried about carbon monoxide poisoning. She learned which 24-hour businesses would let her sit for a few hours without buying anything, and which ones would call security the moment she walked through the door. That's how she found herself outside the Meridian office complex on that cold February night. The building was 30 stories of glass and steel, housing law firms, consulting companies, and financial advisors. Maya had driven past it dozens of times, always impressed by how clean and modern it looked. The entrance had a deep overhang that would keep the rain off, and wide steps where she could sit without blocking the doors. The building was closed for the night and the area seemed safe. Maya parked her car in the nearby garage and walked back with her sleeping bag and a small pillow. She tried to make herself as small as possible, tucking into the corner where she'd be least visible. The concrete was cold, but it was dry, and for the first time in days, Maya felt like she could actually get some rest. She set her phone alarm for 5 in the morning, planning to be gone long before the first employees arrived. Maya had served 3 tours overseas. She'd slept in tents, in bunkers, and once memorably in an abandoned building while under enemy fire. She'd thought she could handle anything, but nothing had prepared her for the exhaustion of being homeless, the constant stress of never knowing where you'd be safe to close your eyes. She was just drifting off to sleep when the security guard's flashlight beam hit her face. Maya woke up instantly, the way soldiers learn to do, going from deep sleep to full alertness in seconds. The guard was young, maybe 25, wearing a uniform that looked like it had been pressed that morning. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here," he said, his voice not unkind but firm. "This is private property." Maya sat up slowly, her back protesting after the cold concrete. "I understand. I'll move along. I wasn't causing any trouble." The guard looked uncomfortable. This clearly wasn't what he'd expected when he took the job. "Look, I'm sorry, but I have to call this in. It's company policy." Maya started packing up her sleeping bag. "I get it. You're just doing your job. I'll be out of here in 2 minutes," but the damage was already done. The guard had radioed for backup, and now there were 2 police officers walking toward them. Maya's heart sank. She'd managed to avoid this exact situation for months, but her luck had finally run out. The officers were professional but thorough. They asked for identification, ran her name through their system, and listened as the building's night manager explained that this was the 3rd time this month they'd found homeless people on the property. The manager was adamant that they needed to send a message. Maya tried to explain her situation. She showed them her military ID card and talked about her service record. One of the officers seemed sympathetic, but the decision had already been made. The property owner wanted to press charges, and that was that. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Maya thought about the irony of it all. She'd spent years defending this country, and now she was being arrested for trying to find a dry place to sleep in the land she'd fought to protect. The officers were respectful as they led her to the patrol car, but Maya felt the weight of every person's stare as early morning commuters began arriving for work. The booking process was routine and humiliating in equal measure. Fingerprints, photos, paperwork. Maya was released on her own recognizance 12 hours later, with a court date circled in red on a citation. Criminal trespassing. It was a misdemeanor, but it was still a criminal charge. Standing outside the police station with her car keys in her hand, Maya realized her situation had just gotten much worse. A criminal record would make finding housing even harder. It would show up on job applications and background checks. What had started as a simple need for shelter had become something that could follow her for years. But Maya was a soldier, and soldiers don't give up. As she walked back to her car, she started making a plan. She had 3 weeks until her court date. 3 weeks to figure out how to turn this disaster into something else entirely. Maya stared at the court summons for the 100th time, the paper now soft from folding and unfolding. 3 weeks felt like forever and no time at all. She sat in her car outside the public library, watching people walk past with their briefcases and coffee cups, heading to jobs and homes she could only dream about. The first thing she did was try to find a lawyer. Maya called every legal aid office in the city, but the waiting lists were months long. Public defenders were only assigned at arraignment, and even then, they'd have maybe 10 minutes to spend on her case. She was on her own, just like she'd been for everything else since coming home from Iraq. Maya decided to represent herself. It wasn't ideal, but she'd always been good at research, and the library had everything she needed. She spent the first week learning about criminal trespassing laws, reading case studies, and trying to understand how the legal system actually worked. It was like learning a new language, one filled with Latin phrases and complicated procedures. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, started recognizing Maya as a regular. She was kind enough to show Maya how to access legal databases and print documents for free. Mrs. Chen never asked why a woman was spending 12 hours a day researching criminal law, and Maya was grateful for that discretion. Between legal research, Maya was still trying to survive. Her daily routine had become a careful dance of timing and location. She'd wake up in her car around dawn, usually, parked behind a 24-hour diner where the manager had stopped bothering her. The first stop was always the truck stop bathroom, where she could wash her face and brush her teeth for $2. Breakfast was usually a convenience store banana and a cup of coffee that she'd nurse for hours. Maya had learned which fast food places had the cheapest meals, and which ones would let her sit for a while without ordering again. Her food budget was $15 a day, which meant a lot of peanut butter sandwiches and instant noodles. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the invisibility. Maya would sit in fast food restaurants and watch families laugh together. Couples hold hands, friends catch up over lunch. She felt like she was watching life through a window, unable to participate. People looked right through her, and sometimes Maya wondered if she was disappearing completely. Her back pain was getting worse from sleeping in the car every night. The Honda's seats weren't designed for someone to live in them, and Maya would wake up each morning feeling like she'd been in a fight. She couldn't afford the pain medication that helped, and over-the-counter pills barely touched the constant ache. The ringing in her ear was getting louder too, especially when she was stressed. Sometimes it sounded like a smoke alarm going off inside her head. Maya had learned to hide her reactions to sudden loud noises, but it was exhausting to constantly stay alert for sounds that might set off her panic response. 2 weeks before her court date, Maya got a break. A temp agency called with a 3-day warehouse job. The work was physically demanding, loading boxes onto trucks for 8 hours, but it paid cash at the end of each day. Maya knew her back wouldn't handle it well, but she needed the money desperately. The first day was brutal. By lunch break, Maya was moving like an old woman, each step sending sharp pains up her spine. She took 4 ibuprofen and kept working. The other employees were friendly enough, but Maya didn't join their conversations. She couldn't risk anyone learning about her living situation. On the second day, Maya's back gave out completely. She was lifting a particularly heavy box when something popped, and suddenly she couldn't straighten up. The supervisor sent her home with half a day's pay and told her not to come back until she had a doctor's note saying she was fit for work. Maya sat in her car in the warehouse parking lot, crying from pain and frustration. She couldn't afford to see a doctor, and without that doctor's note, she couldn't finish the job. It felt like every door was slamming shut in her face. That evening, Maya drove to the Veterans Affairs office she'd visited so many times before. She waited in the parking lot until closing time, then approached a counselor she'd spoken with before. The woman, Jennifer, was loading files into her car when Maya walked up. "I remember you," Jennifer said. "How are things going?" Maya almost lied, almost said everything was fine the way she always did. But something about Jennifer's kind eyes broke through her defenses, and Maya found herself telling the truth. About living in her car, about the arrest, about feeling like she was drowning. Jennifer listened without judgment, then unlocked her office and invited Maya inside. She made some phone calls and found Maya a spot in the VA's emergency mental health program. It wasn't much, just 2 counseling sessions and a referral to their pain management clinic. But it was something. The counselor, Dr. Williams, was a veteran himself. He'd served in Vietnam and understood things that civilian therapists sometimes missed. He didn't try to fix Maya's problems in 2 sessions, but he did help her understand that her feelings weren't weakness or failure. "You're not broken," he told her during their second session. "You're injured, and injuries take time to heal. But healing doesn't always mean going back to exactly who you were before." Maya started thinking about that conversation as she prepared for court. Maybe she couldn't go back to being the person she was before Iraq, before the injury, before the homelessness. But maybe she could become someone new, someone who understood struggle in a way her old self never could. She spent the final week before her court date working on something that had started as legal research but had become something bigger. Maya began writing down everything she'd learned about being homeless, about the gaps in services for veterans, about the way the system worked for some people and failed others completely. She researched other cities and how they handled veteran homelessness. She looked into programs that worked and programs that didn't. She read about something called housing first policies and community-based solutions. Maya started to see patterns, problems that kept repeating because nobody was looking at the big picture. Late at night, parked under streetlights, Maya would write in a notebook she'd bought at the dollar store. She wrote about the catch-22 of needing an address to get services but needing services to get an address. She wrote about the difference between emergency help and long-term solutions. She wrote about dignity and how easy it was to lose and how hard it was to get back. The night before her court appearance, Maya couldn't sleep. Not because she was nervous exactly, but because she felt like she was standing at the edge of something important. She'd spent 3 weeks preparing for what she thought would be a simple plea hearing, but it had become something else entirely. Maya had always been a problem solver. In the military, when her unit faced challenges, She was the one who came up with creative solutions. She was good at seeing the whole picture and figuring out how all the pieces fit together. Homelessness had made her feel powerless, but preparing for court had reminded her of strength she'd forgotten she had. She thought about all the people she'd met in the past months. Other homeless veterans she'd encountered at the library, at shelters, at the VA office. Good people who'd served their country and were now falling through the cracks. Maya wasn't the only one stuck in this impossible situation. As dawn broke over the city, Maya got dressed in her cleanest clothes and prepared for court. She had her folder of research, her notes about veteran homelessness, and a plan that had been growing in her mind for weeks. She didn't know if the judge would listen, but she knew she had to try. Maya had learned that being homeless didn't make her worthless. It had taught her things about resilience, about the kindness of strangers, about the difference between surviving and living. Maybe those lessons were worth something. Maybe her experience, as painful as it had been, could be turned into something useful. She started her car and drove toward the courthouse, carrying with her not just a defense against trespassing charges, but an idea that could change everything. Maya Rodriguez was ready to speak truth to power, and she was no longer afraid of being invisible. Maya arrived at the courthouse 45 minutes early, carrying a worn manila folder that contained 3 weeks of research and hope. The building was imposing. All marble columns and bronze doors that seemed designed to make regular people feel small. She'd been inside government buildings before, but military facilities were different. Those places were built for function. This courthouse was built to intimidate. The security line moved slowly. Maya watched lawyers in expensive suits breeze through a separate entrance while regular people waited to empty their pockets and walk through metal detectors. She'd left everything unnecessary in her car, bringing only her folder, her ID, and $37 in case she needed to pay court fees. Inside, the hallways buzzed with activity. Lawyers wheeled cases on dollies, families huddled together speaking in worried whispers, and court officers directed traffic with the practiced efficiency of people who did this every day. Maya found the directory and located courtroom 4B, where her case would be heard. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, with maybe 50 seats for spectators. The judge's bench dominated the front of the room, raised high enough that everyone had to look up to make eye contact. Maya chose a seat in the middle section where she could see everything clearly. Other defendants were already arriving. Maya recognized the look, that mixture of nervousness and resignation that came with not being able to afford a lawyer. There was an older man in a wrinkled shirt who kept checking his watch, a young woman with a baby who wouldn't stop crying, and several people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the courtroom to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Wong. Judge Wong was younger than Maya had expected, maybe in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She moved with the kind of quiet authority that Maya recognized from military officers who didn't need to raise their voices to command respect. The first few cases moved quickly. Traffic violations mostly, with defendants who pleaded guilty and paid their fines without much discussion. The prosecutor, a tired-looking man in his 30s, rattled off charges and recommended sentences with the efficiency of someone working through a checklist. Maya watched the rhythm of the courtroom, trying to understand how things worked. Some defendants had lawyers who spoke for them. Others stumbled through their explanations while the judge listened with varying degrees of patience. Everyone seemed to know rules that nobody had explained to Maya. When they broke for a 15-minute recess, Maya stepped outside to get some air. Her back was aching from the hard wooden benches, and she needed a moment to review her notes one more time. She wasn't scheduled until after lunch, which gave her more time to prepare but also more time to worry. During the break, Maya overheard 2 lawyers talking about plea bargains and sentencing guidelines. They were discussing cases like chess moves, talking about strategies and precedents. Maya realized she was walking into a game where everyone knew the rules except her. After lunch, the courtroom filled up again. Maya's case was third on the afternoon docket. She watched the first 2 defendants plead guilty to their charges, one for shoplifting, another for public intoxication. Both received fines and community service. The judge was fair but efficient, clearly trying to move through a heavy caseload. Case number 2024 CR 8847, the bailiff announced. People versus Maya Rodriguez. Maya's heart jumped as she stood up. Her folder felt heavy in her hands as she walked to the defendant's table. The prosecutor was already at his podium, shuffling through papers. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "Ms. Rodriguez is charged with criminal trespassing. On February 18th, she was discovered sleeping on private property at the Meridian office complex after hours. The property manager requested that charges be filed. The people recommend a fine of $300 and 40 hours of community service." Judge Wong looked at Maya over her reading glasses. "Ms. Rodriguez, I see you don't have legal representation today. Do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Maya's voice was steadier than she'd expected. "How do you plead to the charge of criminal trespassing?" This was the moment Maya had been preparing for. "Your Honor, I plead not guilty, and I'd like to address the court if possible." Judge Wong raised an eyebrow. Most defendants in her courtroom pleaded guilty to minor charges and moved on with their lives. "You may speak, Ms. Rodriguez, but keep it brief." Maya stepped closer to the podium, opened her folder, and took a breath. "Your Honor, I want to start by saying that I was on private property without permission, and I take full responsibility for that. But I'd like to explain why I was there and what I've learned since my arrest." The courtroom was quiet now. Even the prosecutor looked curious about where this was going. 3 weeks ago, I was a homeless veteran sleeping in my car every night. I chose the Meridian building because it was safe and dry, and I planned to leave before anyone arrived for work. I wasn't trying to cause problems or steal anything. I was just trying to survive. Maya could see Judge Wong listening intently now. She continued, "Since my arrest, I've spent every day researching not just the law but the bigger problem that led to my situation. Your Honor, there are over 37,000 homeless veterans in this country right now. In our city alone, there are more than 400. She pulled out a page of statistics. "I've learned that veteran homelessness isn't usually caused by addiction or mental illness, though those can be factors. Most of us become homeless because of a combination of service-related injuries, delayed disability payments, and a lack of affordable housing." The prosecutor looked confused. This wasn't going like a typical trespassing case. Maya continued, "I've also learned that other cities have found innovative solutions to this problem. Houston reduced veteran homelessness by 63% in 5 years using something called rapid rehousing combined with wraparound services. Salt Lake City has a program where they use empty commercial buildings as temporary shelters." Judge Wong leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Rodriguez, while this is all very interesting, we're here to address the specific charge against you." "I understand, Your Honor, but I believe the two are connected. The reason I was sleeping outside the Meridian building is the same reason hundreds of other veterans in our city don't have safe places to sleep tonight." Maya pulled out another document. "I've spent the last 3 weeks developing a proposal for a pilot program that could help address this issue while also solving a problem for property owners." She could see she had the judge's attention now. The entire courtroom was listening. "The idea is simple," Maya continued. "Many commercial buildings sit empty overnight and on weekends. With proper coordination, security measures, and insurance protections, these spaces could provide temporary overnight shelter for homeless veterans while they work toward permanent housing." Maya outlined her research on liability issues, security protocols, and partnership opportunities with local veteran organizations. She'd thought through everything from background checks to cleaning procedures to emergency contacts. The program would be voluntary for property owners, strictly regulated and focused specifically on veterans who are already connected with social services. It's not a permanent solution, but it could be a bridge that helps people like me avoid situations like the one that brought me here today. Judge Wong was taking notes now. "Ms. Rodriguez, you said you developed this proposal in 3 weeks?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'm not asking the court to excuse my trespassing, but I am asking for consideration of how we might turn situations like mine into opportunities to serve the people who served our country." Maya could feel her confidence growing. "I know what it's like to serve overseas and then come home to find that the country you fought for doesn't have a place for you. But I also know that Americans want to help veterans when they understand the real scope of the problem." She pulled out her final document. "I've already identified 12 property owners in the downtown area who've expressed interest in participating in a pilot program. The Veterans Affairs Office has agreed to provide case management support, and the City Council member for this district has agreed to sponsor the necessary zoning changes. The courtroom was completely silent now. Maya could see the prosecutor looking through his files, clearly not prepared for this kind of defense. Your Honor, Maya concluded, I broke the law because I had nowhere else to go. But maybe we can use this moment to make sure other veterans don't face the same impossible choice. I'm not asking for special treatment because I'm a veteran. I'm asking for creative solutions because I'm an American who believes we can do better. Maya closed her folder and stepped back. Her heart was pounding, but she felt calmer than she had in months. She'd said everything she needed to say. Judge Wong looked at the prosecutor. Does the people have any response to Ms. Rodriguez's presentation? The prosecutor stood up, clearly thrown off his script. Your Honor, while Ms. Rodriguez's proposal is certainly comprehensive, she did commit the offense of criminal trespassing. The property owner was clear about wanting to press charges. I understand that, Judge Wong said, but I'm intrigued by what I've heard today. Ms. Rodriguez approached the bench. Maya walked forward, unsure what to expect. I'd like to see this proposal of yours, Judge Wong said quietly. Not for sentencing purposes, but because I think you might be onto something important. Would you be willing to meet with me after court to discuss this further? Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. Yes, Your Honor, absolutely. Judge Wong returned to her normal speaking voice. The court will take a 15-minute recess before rendering a decision in this case. As people filed out of the courtroom, Maya remained standing at the defendant's table, hardly believing what had just happened. She'd walked into court expecting to plead guilty and pay a fine. Instead, she'd found her voice again, and maybe, just maybe, she'd found a way to turn her worst moment into something meaningful. When court resumed, Maya noticed the atmosphere had changed. People were whispering in the gallery, and even the court officers seemed more alert. Word had spread during the recess that something unusual was happening in courtroom 4B. Judge Wong returned to the bench with a thoughtful expression. Maya stood at the defendant's table, her folder clutched in her hands, trying to read the judge's face for any hint of what was coming. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Wong began, in 22 years on the bench I've heard thousands of cases. Most defendants who appear before me either plead guilty quickly or offer explanations for why their circumstances should excuse their actions. You've done something different today. Maya felt her pulse quicken. She couldn't tell if this was good or bad. You've acknowledged your actions, taken responsibility for them, and then used your experience to identify a larger problem and propose a constructive solution. That shows me something about your character that I find compelling. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This wasn't following the usual script. Judge Wong continued, however, the fact remains that you did trespass on private property. The law is clear on this point, and I can't simply ignore it because I'm impressed by your initiative. Maya felt her heart sink. She'd allowed herself to hope that maybe, somehow, her presentation had changed everything. Therefore, Judge Wong said, I'm going to do something unusual. I'm finding you guilty of criminal trespassing, but I'm suspending the sentence pending completion of a special condition. Maya looked confused. I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I don't understand what that means. It means that if you complete the condition I'm about to set, the conviction will be removed from your record. If you fail to complete it, you'll serve the standard sentence of a fine and community service. Judge Wong pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Ms. Rodriguez, your condition is this. You have 6 months to implement a pilot version of the program you've proposed. If you can demonstrate that your idea works in practice, not just on paper, I'll dismiss the charges entirely. The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. The prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, I object. This is highly irregular. We don't typically— Mr. Patterson, Judge Wong interrupted. This entire case is irregular. Ms. Rodriguez has presented what appears to be a viable solution to a serious community problem. I'm not going to let procedural tradition prevent us from exploring that solution. Maya felt dizzy. Your Honor, are you saying that if I can actually create this program, my charges will be dropped? That's exactly what I'm saying. But understand, Ms. Rodriguez, this isn't a free pass. You'll need to show real results. You'll need to house actual veterans, demonstrate measurable outcomes, and prove that your program can operate safely and effectively. Judge Wong looked directly at Maya. I'm also going to require regular check-ins with the court. You'll report to me monthly on your progress. And if you fail to make genuine progress or if your program creates problems for the community, The original sentence will be reinstated immediately. Maya's mind was racing. She'd prepared for this court appearance hoping to avoid jail time. Now she was being given the chance to actually implement her idea, with the backing of a judge's order. "Your Honor," Maya said, "I accept the condition, but I have to ask, why are you doing this?" Judge Wong was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Rodriguez, my younger brother, is a Marine veteran. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan and came home with PTSD and a traumatic brain injury. For 8 months, he lived in his truck while waiting for VA benefits to come through." The courtroom was completely silent now. My brother was lucky. He had family who could help him navigate the system and a support network to fall back on. But I've always wondered what would have happened if he hadn't had those advantages. When I listened to your presentation today, I heard echoes of his story. Judge Wong continued, "More importantly, I heard someone who had taken a terrible situation and found a way to turn it into something positive. That's not common, Ms. Rodriguez. Most people would have simply pleaded guilty, paid the fine, and moved on with their lives." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. "Your Honor, I won't let you down. I know I can make this work." "I believe you can," Judge Wong said, "but you're going to need help. This court will provide you with a letter of endorsement for your program, which should help you when approaching potential partners and funders." She turned to address the entire courtroom. "I'm also going to do something else unusual. I'm going to ask anyone in this courtroom who might be interested in supporting Ms. Rodriguez's program to stay after we adjourn." Maya looked around and was surprised to see several people nodding. She recognized Mrs. Chen from the library, who had apparently followed the case. There was also a woman in a business suit who looked like she might be a social worker, and an older man wearing a veteran's cap. Judge Wong returned her attention to Maya. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm scheduling your first progress report for 6 weeks from today. I want to see evidence that you've begun implementing your program, partnerships formed, funding secured, and ideally at least one veteran housed through your initiative." "Yes, Your Honor, I'll be ready. I hope so, because I'm not just giving you a second chance. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm giving you a platform to prove that creative thinking and community cooperation can solve problems that traditional approaches have failed to address." Judge Wong picked up her gavel. "This court is adjourned." As people began filing out of the courtroom, Maya remained standing at the defendant's table, still processing what had just happened. 6 months ago, she'd been leading soldiers in Iraq. 4 months ago, she'd been evicted from her apartment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been arrested for trespassing. And now she was being given the chance to create a program that could help hundreds of veterans. The prosecutor approached her table. "Ms. Rodriguez, I have to admit I've never seen anything like what just happened in there. For what it's worth, I hope your program succeeds." Maya shook his hand. "Thank you. I know you were just doing your job." As promised, several people stayed behind to talk with Maya. Mrs. Chen introduced herself properly and offered to help with research and documentation. The woman in the business suit turned out to be Linda Foster, a case manager with the county's Homeless Services Department, who was excited about potential collaboration. The veteran in the cap was the biggest surprise. His name was Frank Washington, and he was a retired Army colonel who now worked in commercial real estate. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, "I own 6 buildings downtown and 3 of them sit empty overnight. If you can work out the insurance and liability issues, I'd like to be your first partner." Maya felt overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support. "I don't know how to thank you all." "You don't need to thank us," Linda Foster said. "You need to succeed, because if this works, it could be a model for cities across the country." As the group exchanged contact information and began making plans for their first meeting, Maya realized that her arrest had been the catalyst for something much bigger than she'd ever imagined. She'd walked into court as a homeless veteran facing criminal charges. She was walking out as the founder of what could become a groundbreaking program. Judge Wong approached the group before leaving. "Ms. Rodriguez, I want you to understand something. What I did today was unusual, but it wasn't charity. I believe your program can work, but belief isn't enough. You're going to need to be organized, professional, and absolutely committed to making this succeed." "I understand." "Your Honor, good. Because 6 months from now, I expect to see results that prove homeless veterans can be housed safely and effectively through community partnerships. If you can demonstrate that, you'll have created something truly important." As Maya walked out of the courthouse, she felt different than she had in months. For the first time since her injury in Iraq, She had a mission again. She had a purpose that was bigger than just surviving day to day. That evening, Maya sat in her car outside the Meridian office complex where she'd been arrested. Instead of feeling shame or anger, she felt grateful. That night on the cold concrete steps had led to this moment, to this opportunity to help other veterans avoid the same desperate situation. Maya pulled out her phone and began making a list of everything she needed to do in the next 6 weeks. Find insurance coverage, develop intake procedures, create partnerships with veteran service organizations, establish safety protocols, secure funding for supplies and staff. It was an enormous amount of work, but Maya felt energized in a way she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. She had a mission again, and she was determined to succeed. 6 weeks later, Maya stood in the lobby of Frank Washington's downtown office building, watching as the first participant in the Safe Haven program checked in for the night. The transformation from courthouse defendant to program director felt surreal, but the work had been the most fulfilling thing she'd done since leaving the military. The first month after court had been a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and problem-solving. Maya quickly discovered that having Judge Wong's endorsement opened doors that had been locked shut before. City officials returned her calls. Insurance companies took her seriously. Veteran service organizations wanted to partner with her, but endorsement was just the beginning. Maya had to learn skills she'd never needed in the military. She taught herself about nonprofit management, insurance liability, building codes, and municipal regulations. She spent 14-hour days at the library, making phone calls and filling out forms that seemed designed to discourage anyone without a law degree. The breakthrough came when Linda Foster from Homeless Services introduced Maya to the Community Foundation. Their Veteran Services Board was intrigued by the Safe Haven concept and agreed to provide startup funding. $25,000 to cover the first 6 months of operations, including liability insurance, basic supplies, and a part-time coordinator salary for Maya. Frank Washington proved to be more than just a building owner. He'd served in Desert Storm and understood both the challenges veterans faced and the concerns property owners had about liability. He helped Maya navigate the commercial real estate world, introducing her to other building owners who might participate. The insurance hurdle had seemed impossible at first. No company wanted to cover homeless people sleeping in commercial buildings, but Maya's military background and detailed safety protocols impressed the risk assessors. After reviewing her procedures for background checks, security measures, and emergency protocols, they agreed to provide coverage. Maya's first participant was Tommy Valdez, a Navy veteran who'd been living in his van for 8 months. Tommy had served on submarines for 12 years before a back injury ended his career. He was articulate, intelligent, and completely demoralized by the system's failure to help him transition to civilian life. "This is really happening?" Tommy asked as Maya showed him to his assigned sleeping area in the building's conference room. "I get to sleep indoors tonight and nobody's going to hassle me or call the cops?" "It's really happening," Maya assured him. "But remember, this is temporary housing while we work on getting you into permanent placement. Linda from Homeless Services will meet with you tomorrow morning to review your case." Maya had learned that the key to successful transitional programs was combining immediate help with long-term planning. Safe Haven wasn't just about providing a place to sleep. It was about creating stability that allowed people to focus on the work of rebuilding their lives. The program operated from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. in Frank's building. Participants had to check in by 9 and be out by 6 in the morning. They received a sleeping bag, basic toiletries, and access to a bathroom and small kitchen area. But they also received case management services, job placement assistance, and help navigating the VA system. Maya hired 2 part-time security guards who were also veterans. Their job wasn't to police the participants, but to ensure building security and provide overnight supervision. She'd learned from her research that successful programs relied on peer support rather than traditional authority structures. By the end of the 2nd month, Safe Haven was housing 8 veterans regularly. Maya had expanded to include 2 more buildings, both owned by supporters who'd heard about the program through word of mouth. The city council had passed a resolution supporting the initiative, and local veteran organizations were referring people to the program. The real validation came from the participants themselves. Tommy Valdez had secured permanent housing through a VA program and landed a job with the city's Public Works Department. Maria Santos, a former Army medic, had used the stability of Safe Haven to complete her nursing license renewal and was working at the county hospital. But success brought new challenges. Maya discovered that some participants had complex needs that went beyond housing: mental health issues, addiction, legal problems, medical conditions that required ongoing treatment. Safe Haven could provide temporary stability, but it couldn't solve every problem that led to homelessness. Maya also learned that not every participant was ready for the program's expectations. Background checks revealed criminal histories that made some veterans ineligible. Others couldn't follow the program's basic rules about sobriety and respectful behavior. Maya had to develop protocols for addressing these situations while maintaining the program's safety and effectiveness. The monthly court appearances with Judge Wong became celebrations rather than check-ins. Maya would arrive with progress reports, participant testimonials, and documentation of the program's growing impact. Judge Wong was clearly pleased with the results, but she also asked tough questions about sustainability and long-term planning. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Wong said during their 4th monthly meeting, "You've demonstrated that your program works. But what happens when my 6-month deadline ends? How do you ensure that Safe Haven continues beyond the terms of your sentence?" Maya had been preparing for this question. "Your Honor, I've incorporated Safe Haven as a nonprofit organization with a board of directors that includes veterans, business leaders, and service providers. We've received funding commitments from 3 major foundations, and the city has agreed to include us in their consolidated homeless services plan." She handed Judge Wong a thick folder. "We've also been contacted by officials from other cities who want to replicate the program. Houston, Denver, and Phoenix have all sent delegations to observe our operations." Judge Wong flipped through the documents. "This is impressive work, Ms. Rodriguez. You've created something that's attracted national attention." "Thank you, Your Honor. But I want you to know that none of this would have happened without that day in your courtroom. You could have just sentenced me to community service and moved on to the next case. Instead, you gave me the chance to turn a mistake into something meaningful." Judge Wong smiled. "Ms. Rodriguez, I didn't give you anything except an opportunity. You did all the hard work of turning that opportunity into results." 3 weeks before Maya's 6-month deadline, she received a call that changed everything. The Department of Veterans Affairs wanted to fund a pilot program based on Safe Haven's model in 10 cities across the country. They were offering $2 million over 3 years to support replication and evaluation of the program. Maya found herself on a conference call with VA officials in Washington, city planners from multiple states, and academic researchers who wanted to study the program's outcomes. The conversation was surreal. 6 months earlier, she'd been sleeping in her car. Now she was being asked to advise federal policy on veteran homelessness. The final court appearance was standing room only. Local media had picked up the story, and community members wanted to see the conclusion of Maya's unusual case. Judge Wong had allowed several Safe Haven participants to attend and speak about their experiences. Tommy Valdez addressed the court first. "Your Honor, 6 months ago I was living in my van and had pretty much given up hope. The Safe Haven program didn't just give me a place to sleep. It gave me back my dignity and the support I needed to rebuild my life." Maria Santos followed. "Judge Wong, what Maya created saved my life. Not just because I had a roof over my head, but because someone finally understood that veterans need more than just charity. We need respect and the chance to get back on our feet." When it was Maya's turn to speak, she felt overwhelmed by how much had changed. "Your Honor, when I was arrested outside the Meridian building, I thought my life had hit rock bottom. I never imagined that experience would lead to this." She gestured toward the gallery filled with supporters. "Safe Haven has housed 47 veterans in 6 months. 31 of them have moved into permanent housing. 26 have found employment. But the numbers don't tell the whole story." Maya's voice grew stronger. "This program proved that when you treat people with dignity and give them the tools they need, they can overcome incredible challenges. It proved that business owners and veterans can work together to solve problems that government programs haven't been able to address." Judge Wong listened to the testimonials with obvious satisfaction. When it came time for her final ruling, she spoke directly to Maya. "Ms. Rodriguez, 6 months ago you stood before this court as a defendant facing criminal charges. Today you stand before this court as the founder of a program that has gained national recognition and federal funding." The courtroom was completely silent, based on the evidence presented over the past 6 months. I find that you have not only completed the conditions of your sentence, but exceeded them in every possible way. The charges against you are hereby dismissed, and they will be expunged from your record." The courtroom erupted in applause. Maya felt tears streaming down her face as Frank Washington, Linda Foster, Mrs. Chen, and dozens of other supporters celebrated around her. But Judge Wong wasn't finished. "Ms. Rodriguez, I want to say something else. In my years on the bench, I've seen thousands of people make mistakes. Most of them learn from those mistakes and move on with their lives. Very few of them turn their mistakes into opportunities to help others." She looked around the courtroom. "What happened here shows us something important about second chances. When we combine accountability with opportunity, when we challenge people to rise to their potential, rather than simply punishing them for their failures, remarkable things can happen." After court adjourned, Maya found herself surrounded by reporters, supporters, and veterans who wanted to thank her. But the moment that meant the most came when Judge Wong approached her privately. "Maya," she said, using her first name for the first time, "I want you to know that you've changed how I think about justice. You've shown me that sometimes the best sentence is the one that challenges people to become their best selves." Maya shook the judge's hand. "Thank you for seeing potential where others saw only problems." 6 months later, Maya stood before the National Association of Veteran Service Organizations, delivering a keynote speech about innovative approaches to veteran homelessness. Safe haven programs were operating in 15 cities, with plans for expansion to 25 more. Maya had moved from her car into a small apartment near the original safe haven site. She'd been hired as the national director of the program, with a salary that allowed her to finally address her medical needs and start planning for the future. But more importantly, she'd rediscovered her sense of purpose. Every morning, Maya woke up knowing that her work was making a difference in veterans' lives. She'd turned her lowest moment into a mission that was changing how communities across America addressed homelessness. The night before her speech, Maya drove past the Meridian office complex where everything had started. The building now housed one of the most successful safe haven sites, and Frank Washington had installed a small plaque near the entrance. "In recognition of those who serve, and those who help them find their way home." Maya smiled as she read the plaque. She'd spent so many months feeling invisible, forgotten by a country she'd served. Now she knew that invisibility had been temporary. Sometimes people just needed someone to show them how to see clearly. As she drove away from the building, Maya thought about all the veterans who would sleep safely that night, because someone had been willing to look beyond a simple,